British forces are reportedly preparing to deploy to Ukraine, raising fears that World War III may be drawing dangerously close. According to sources, British special forces have been ordered to stand ready for deployment to Ukraine under the guise of peacekeeping. However, this move could signal a deeper step toward direct military involvement by the West. London has long maintained a hawkish stance toward Moscow, not only by continuously supplying weapons and training Ukrainian troops, but also by playing a pivotal role in obstructing every effort to negotiate peace since the early days of Russia's special military operation. The UK actively worked to derail the Istanbul Agreement, a deal that could have laid the groundwork for a peaceful resolution, but was ultimately rejected by the West to prolong the conflict. The decision to place special forces on high alert suggests that Britain is no longer content with merely providing arms or remote training. It may be gearing up for boots-on-the-ground intervention. This escalation not only pushes the Ukraine conflict to a dangerous new threshold, but also heightens the risk of a direct confrontation between NATO and Russia. Could this be a test of Moscow's reaction to a broader escalation scenario? And if British special forces do set foot in Ukraine, what geopolitical consequences might follow? According to iNews, the UK Cabinet Office issued a directive last week to special forces units, placing them on heightened readiness. This order was sent to the Permanent Joint Headquarters, PJHQ, the UK's Military Planning and Command Centre, with instructions to ensure personnel and equipment are prepared for a potential operation. Notably, even reserve special forces units have been included in these preparations, indicating that this is not just a hypothetical contingency, but a concrete action plan from London. While the UK Ministry of Defence declined to comment, citing its long-standing policy of not discussing special forces operations, experts suggest this could be a strategic move by London to deploy troops without requiring parliamentary approval. This raises questions. Is this truly a peacekeeping mission, or is it a calculated step by Britain to gain an advantage as the Ukraine chessboard enters a new phase? This development comes as UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer pushes a coalition of the willing, a group of nations prepared to send troops to Ukraine to enforce a potential peace agreement. This alliance is set to convene in London on March 20th to discuss mechanisms for supporting Kyiv in the event of a ceasefire. Both Britain and France have pledged to deploy troops to Ukraine if a ceasefire lasts at least 30 days. However, Starmer later clarified that initial ceasefire monitoring would rely on satellites rather than immediate troop deployments, likely as a way to gauge Moscow's response before committing further. Interestingly, former U.S. President Donald Trump once stated he would consider deploying European peacekeeping forces to Ukraine, though there's no indication yet that Washington will join this plan. If the U.S. opts out, the question remains, would Britain and France dare to act unilaterally, risking direct conflict with Russia? Analysts warn that if British special forces do enter Ukraine, it would mark a dangerous escalation, not only increasing the likelihood of a NATO-Russia showdown, but also potentially expanding the conflict beyond Ukraine's borders. Moscow has repeatedly cautioned that any Western military presence on Ukrainian soil would be viewed as a hostile act, with unpredictable consequences. Amid the ongoing complexity of the war, London's accelerated military preparations could be seen as either a calculated gamble to force Russia into negotiations on Western terms, or a prelude to deeper intervention. Either way, the Ukraine conflict is clearly entering a new phase, where the players are no longer just trading weapons, but inching closer to direct military confrontation. This shift goes beyond deterrence rhetoric or remote military aid. Western powers are edging toward direct involvement in the Ukrainian battlefield. According to The Times, Starmer has signaled that London is prepared for a long-term troop deployment to Ukraine, ostensibly to support a ceasefire and prevent further Russian attacks. This is no longer symbolic posturing, but a calculated escalation. Government sources suggest these forces could remain in Ukraine indefinitely, effectively amounting to an occupation disguised as peacekeeping. Yet, looking at how the West has managed the Ukraine war from the start, it's hard to ignore that Britain and France showed little interest in peace when the Istanbul Agreement, a potential end to hostilities in the war's early months, was sabotaged, largely due to London's pressure on Kyiv to keep fighting. Now the same Britain preaches peace while preparing to send troops, turning the conflict into a seemingly endless war. Britain isn't alone. A coalition of roughly 10 Western nations, including France, Turkey, Canada, and Australia, is negotiating to deploy up to 30,000 peacekeepers to Ukraine under a humanitarian veneer. In reality, this is a strategy to expand Western military influence on Ukrainian soil. The issue isn't just the troop numbers, but their purpose and methods. The Times reports that the rules of engagement, ROE, for these forces will be finalized soon, meaning Western troops might not merely observe or defend peace, but could be authorized to use force if they perceive a threat. This fuels concerns that once the West sets foot in Ukraine, it will no longer be a neutral party, but an active participant in a war it once vowed to avoid directly joining. Moscow wasted no time responding. On March 16th, Russian Security Council Deputy Chairman Dmitry Medvedev warned that British or French troops in Ukraine would mean all-out war with NATO. He pointedly advised London and Paris to consult Donald Trump before proceeding, hinting that even Washington might hesitate to back such a risky escalation. France, however, has taken a defiant stance. President Emmanuel Macron declared that the West doesn't need Russia's permission to deploy peacekeepers to Ukraine, a bold challenge to Moscow that reflects Paris's increasingly interventionist foreign policy. Yet Macron added a caveat. Western troops would only deploy if the situation on the ground is safe for them. This raises a question. If fighting persists, could the West use protecting peacekeepers as a pretext for direct intervention? If the West does send troops to Ukraine, even under the banner of peacekeeping, it would be a grave escalation, placing the world in a more perilous position than ever. Western leaders once promised not to deploy forces to Ukraine to avoid clashing with Russia, but now they're finding ways to justify a military presence under the guise of peace. In reality, war can't be frozen by a unilateral ceasefire. Russia won't tolerate Western troops near its borders, while Ukraine refuses to abandon its goal of reclaiming all its territory. Far from reducing conflict, Western military presence would only make it more complex and volatile. Moreover, the West seems to be playing a double game, professing a desire for peace while pouring weapons into Ukraine and stoking tensions with Russia. This paints a troubling picture. Are these peacekeepers truly meant to keep the peace, or are they a tool for deeper intervention, providing a pretext to sustain an endless conflict? Notably, Donald Trump, who once vowed to end the Ukraine war quickly, has yet to weigh in on Britain and France's plans. If Washington stays out, can London and Paris go it alone against Russia? And more crucially, do they genuinely want peace, or are they prolonging the war for their own political ends? Historically, the West has used peacekeeping as a pretext for escalation, but in today's climate, where NATO-Russia tensions are at their highest since the Cold War, a misstep could spark a far deadlier confrontation. If peace were the goal, the West would prioritize negotiations over troop deployments. Yet for Britain and France, peace seems less a priority than a means to advance their military and political ambitions. With these developments, it's clear the West, especially the UK and France, has no real intention of seeking lasting peace in Ukraine. Under the cover of peacekeeping, they're steadily deepening their involvement, paving the way for a direct clash with Russia. Deploying forces without Moscow's consent only heightens the stakes, trapping Ukraine in an endless war and pushing Europe toward full-scale conflict. If peace were truly the aim, why not push for talks instead of adding fuel to the fire? Is this a calculated move to prolong the war for strategic gain rather than Ukraine's benefit? And most critically, is the world inching closer to a point of no return? Stay tuned for sharp analysis and multidimensional perspectives on the global chessboard. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for updates on the latest geopolitical developments.